Hey everyone, it's me, the guy who paints miniatures and can't think of any good introductions for his videos. Let's jump in. These two aggressors were the more Crimson Fists that I painted this month. They were part of a generous Christmas gift that I got back in December, born of my need for an ammo belt for my Pedro Kentor that you saw last month. I didn't want to let them go to waste, so I decided to make them supplements to my existing unit. From a tactical standpoint, a unit of 5 aggressors is a pretty attractive target for enemy fire, but imagine the possibilities if they actually get into firing range. These aggressors and their big old Gravis armor are still fun to paint. I love the bulky Buzz Lightyear looking style to them. Lots of curved crevices. Next up this month was Osha from the Stark Heroes box set. She's a pretty simple model, a lot of fiddling around with grays and browns to make her look plainly dressed, or some kind of raggedy clothing that you'd see on a wildling made to dress and comb her hair by a house of Westeros. I like how distinctive and large she is, and the wild shape of her hair adds a sense of visual flair to the model that she might not have otherwise. Great posture on her. Since I used the ammo belt from one aggressor to make Pedro, I had an extra aggressor left over with only the Flamer Gauntlet option, and I wanted to give him a home. I decided that instead of making a lone flame unit for my Crimson Fist aggressors, I should make him a Black Templar, the other side of the coin to the Crimson Fists. I probably won't ever stick him in a list, but I do enjoy the thought of this soul lunatic wandering around a war zone, angrily screaming profanities and lighting small fires. This is the first time I've ever free-handed heraldry onto a pauldron, and I like how it came together, even if my attempts at a Teutonic cross came out looking a bit more like a maple leaf. Maybe it's just the Canadian in me. Also, painting all that black power armor gave me some practice in that regard, which might pay off soon depending on how far I get in my next project. The first of the poor fellows that I painted this month were a lot more enjoyable than I thought they'd be. They have very simple clothing, and it encouraged me to spend more time on their skin, defining contours, musculature, and experimenting with tone and color. I broke up the painting of this unit throughout the month, but they were so quick and fun I might actually be able to just blast through another box sometime if I feel like enhancing their ranks. The next investigator from the Cthulhu Death May Die lineup was Fatima. Anyway, it was another chance to apply skin tone practice that I'd managed on those poor fellows, and I also tried more free-handing of details on her clothes, like the dressed pattern on Borden. This one has a lot of gold filigree up along her dress and skirt. It was working with a metallic gold this time, and my efforts at defining lace met with mixed success. I think from a distance it adds a nice little bit of flair to her model. Trying to detail those tarot cards she was holding was a little easier, especially now that I had an actual shape and pattern in mind. I think they came out okay. Rickon and Shaggy Dog represent the last of the Stark Heroes, for now in any case. I wanted to capture the white cloak that he wears without making it a little too white. I think the idea is that he's still wearing Stark colors and they're very light gray. I ended up not detailing his tiny face or painting in his eyes. It ends up looking a bit creepy if you really zoom in, but underneath the hood I think it sells that his face is in shadow, and besides, it's just Rickon. The minuscule details on his belt were fun to scribble in, and Shaggy Dog was pretty easy. Just a great deal of black with some off black on top, gray, and a slobbering of pink in his mouth. I've always enjoyed painting the direwolves, and now I just have Ghost to look forward to. After wrapping up the Stark Heroes, it was time for more poor fellows and more skin tones to experiment with. Gray hair, especially on the guy here, was a little bit challenging and still is, but it's not the worst. I also enjoy doing the stubble on the spearman's head. That was nice to mix together some simple grays and blacks with flesh tone to create a transparent effect. These guys also have big bushy eyebrows, and I kind of like it. Then it was time to move on to the Lannister Heroes box number 2 and Barristan Selmy, the captain of the Kingsguard. All of that white armor was intimidating. The only other experience I have in that area is with the Primaris apothecary, and I'm still not entirely happy with how that white-helmeted doctor turned out. I considered getting contrast paint just to fill in the shading and style of it, but then I realized I should go for more of an enamel color with a slightly fleshier base tone. I'm quite pleased with how it looks in photographs, a lot better than the stark, flat white that I tried to make the apothecary. I made a few minor aesthetic choices here that I build on in future models, the coloration of his plate versus his filigree and the chainmail beneath. I didn't paint any eyeballs on this model, but considering how low on his brow his helmet sits and how much shadow it casts on his face, I think it would have looked a little odd if I doodled in some white eyeballs. Deciding to revert to 2 characters for every 4 squads that I paint, I decided on Elizabeth Ives, another investigator from Cthulhu Death May Die, and that finally meant a time to apply all of that dark skin experimentation that I'd been doing. I tried to make them look like their character cards, and with Elizabeth that meant a lot more colors and flashes of detail than I expected. I kept on going back to reference it to add in the color of her underdress and the trim on her skirt. The tiny gun was oddly tricky for my usual approach to black metal, where I just apply multiple layers of a shade, waiting for each one to dry before putting on another slap of Nuln Oil. This time I had to focus such a small area that there was danger of it slopping out. I think I remember re-highlighting most of her skin after the fact. Not much to say here with these 5 cultists, just more of the same and a lot of red. These guys were fun and a cheap unit to knock off. Usually they're good for just moving through so that I can get back to a character that I've been meaning to do. I enjoyed detailing and doodling in the text for the books that they're holding, and I think I included a few little in-gags, references to things like Berserk, Bloodborne, and other works of the Cthulhu mythos. I've had this Primaris Power Fist Plasma Pistol Captain variant kicking around forever, and I primarily got into Scavenge Fists for my Pedro Cantor build, the helmet and backpack specifically. You can see how long he's been rattling around in my unpainted box from the number of spikes that have broken off his iron halo. I think I ended up evening him out by snapping off one on one side. I compensated with a few captain pieces and a helmet that I shaved off of an easy build sergeant's thigh, with a neck made out of green stuff. If you look closely, you can see it. Considering how often I paint Crimson Fists, there was not a grand deal of experimentation, but it did let me refine and work on the shading technique I apply to capes. Thus, Captain Grendel was born. This is my 3rd and possibly final iteration of Jaime Lannister from the Song of Ice and Fire game. In my efforts to stick to his character card, I noticed that there was a great deal of silver in his armor design. It made me want to variate on the color placement I established with Barristan Selmy. I enjoyed experimenting with armor composition on these guys, and I particularly like how well the smug look on his face turned out. I always enjoyed detailing the irises of Jaime's cat green eyes. His hair was fun to detail and highlight, and I really do like the silvery look of his armor and how it plays off with the enamel white in other areas. It inspired me to start experimenting with future Kingsguard. The last 4 poor fellows completed the unit. A few of the color tones turned out a little off base, but these were a good unit to experiment with. I really like how quickly I was able to polish these guys off to my standard, so I'm not opposed to picking up another unit sometime. It would fit with their on-the-table presence, where they specialize in mobbing opponents with an inexhaustible and refreshing source of low-level grunts with excellent morale. Sir Mandan Moore of the Kingsguard was when I committed to giving every Kingsguard a different look, placing enamel, silver components, and gold details in different places in the name of alluding to a certain bespoke, customized quality to their armor. All of these guys are wealthy knights who have been elevated to the illustrious position of a Kingsguard, so it makes sense that they'd buy and have made a custom suit of armor to reflect their station. For the same reason, I've decided to color their head plumes to help tell them apart. Mandon has an orange crest, the dominant color of his house heraldry. Going back, it makes sense that Barristan Selmy, the captain of the Kingsguard, would have a completely undistinct white plume, marking his complete and utter devotion to the cause. Considering how Mandan Moore was often described as death in snow-white silk, I incorporated a lot of white into his armor compared to the other Kingsguard. I think it makes him look ghostly, just the kind of person to attempt to strike down Tyrion in the middle of the Battle of Blackwater. Primaris Lieutenant this time, and I really don't have much to say. He's from the Dark Imperium set, and I've had him kicking around for a while before I finally decided to polish him off and completely expunge my Warhammer 40k hobby debt. With a few finagles that I gave him, like a helmet, because everybody in my army wears a helmet, and I replaced his pistol with just a pointing hand from the standard Primaris Captain set. A Space Marine that just constantly dual-wields a rifle and a sidearm is ridiculous after all, and 40k is a place where only sensible decisions are made. I think I did a slightly better job on his helmet stripe than the last lieutenant, but it's always an uphill process. The little details are what I live for on these models, considering how their uniform color scheme doesn't inspire a lot of variation. Maybe I should paint some Chaos Marines sometime. Well, that concludes the miniatures that I painted this month. As for pending models, supply chains are open once again, so expect plenty of debt, like these Sword Masters for the Targaryen side, more Targaryens, some Cell Swords from the Bloody Mummers, and... Oh, God! Oh, Jesus, what have I done? Yep, back in the hole again. I'm very happy with the output that I managed to put in this month. A few of them were just very simple, cheap units to churn out, but considering the general amount that I've created, and all in the name of making space for the Indominus box, I'm very happy with how it's come together. Let's run up tallies. Running up totals at the end of July, I have managed to paint 29 models over the course of the month. That's almost one a day, bringing me up to 156 total models painted. I came so close to actually eclipsing my pending count, but with the March of the Indominus box upon my shelves, I reach 84 models pending in this month, bringing up the total to an eternal struggle of 229. Oh well, the chase continues. Still at one game played this year, I'm beginning to think that 2020 was not the time to introduce this aspect to my count. See you next month.